couple of quick questions here that I've dropped in, but if you still haven't sent yours in, there is still time. You can use the Q&A tab on screen to just type a question to us. But Melissa, this one dropped in during your presentation here, and it was just asking for some best practices perhaps when coming up with a ransomware response plan and things that are commonly overlooked. Is perhaps OFAC contact or contacting OFAC, is that something that's perhaps very commonly overlooked when it comes to a ransomware response? And are there anything or any items that perhaps you've seen in your experience that are often overlooked when it comes to creating one of these response plans for ransomware?
That's a great question. So I think the OFAC part of it probably historically wasn't included, and in light of the October 1st, 2020 guidance, it should be included. So part of this gets to having, if you will, an OFAC sanctions compliance plan, and maybe you don't have that, but that would be part of it. Whether you contact OFAC sort of when you would, that could also be part of it. But I think more generally sort of having an OFAC compliance plan, and then how that would intersect with ransomware. In other words, if you get a ransomware request, start looking at your compliance program, you know, what would be some of the factors for paying or probably not paying the ransom. So definitely, I think a big one that I continue to see overlooked is having maybe a subset there may be a decision-making group for a general incident, for a ransomware incident, to actually agree to pay, and then maybe in an alternative or virtual currency. I think you'd have to take into account who in your organization would have authority to make that decision either way. So that's one I often see overlooked. I think other things, sort of permutations, you know, what would be the situation if it's not so much the data is encrypted and held hostage, but what if it were threatened to be published? So that's another one that, again, it's sort of a twist. It's more what's happening in practice. So those are just, this isn't an exhaustive list, but those are some of the factors. I also think, you know, what would you do to secure the currency? In other words, most organizations, maybe some already have Bitcoin wallets or service providers. I'd say verify who your service provider to provide Bitcoin services is if you don't have one, or maybe you engaged them earlier and they were like, sure, I'll provide Bitcoin services. Are they still doing it in light of the guidance? And that's both OFAC and FinCEN. And finally, you know, speaking with your cyber liability insurer and or your insurance broker about what would happen in the event of ransomware. Would you be able to make a good and valid claim? Could the ransom be paid as part of the policy? So those are things I see in terms of updates. Hopefully this was responsive. If there's more, my contact information is in the slides, and I'd be happy to dialogue after this webinar.
Thank you so much, Melissa. Chris, Joe, anything you'd like to add to that? Excellent. We've got a couple of other questions as well that we can jump into. Chris, this one dropped in a couple of times, but it dropped in most recently while you were speaking. It was just asking, with the major increase in working from home, what are the types of changes that you've seen organizations making? It dropped in most recently during your segment, but if anyone else has anything to add to that, we would love to hear it. But Chris, perhaps you want to lead us off.
Yeah, so since the increase of work from home, right, a lot of companies have gone back to, you know, what does their work from home policy look like? What are the requirements for that to happen? You know, you have people who now need VPN access who have never needed it, right? So there's education or training that comes along with that. You know, what are the do's and don'ts when you're, you know, at home, especially if you're somebody that deals with numbers, right? Financials, things like that. There's a lot of stringent regulation around that. So how do you safely do that from home? And so a lot of companies are spending a lot of time in the policies and procedures and employee education. You know, that's kind of the first safeguard that they're increasing. Additionally, from a security standpoint, I've seen a lot more organizations enabling the end user, right? So you and I to have more control over how we protect the data that we inevitably create as we're doing our day jobs. Meaning things like it might be agent based, it might be it might be a service. But the ability to encrypt or redact or, mask certain files or elements as we're creating them, I've seen a lot more of that technology in use. Joe, anything?
Thank you. Yeah, the one thing I would mention is, before this whole pandemic hit, like you said, people weren't really using VPNs, and quite a few organizations out there didn't really have working remote as an option, but that quickly changed. And something that changed with that was a lot of people had their laptops and desktops at home that they were working from home from. And so, sure, they had the VPNs, sure, they were accessing cloud shares, but you have the bigger liability of folks that are downloading information to their devices. It's not in the office anymore. When someone leaves an organization within the office, the computer stays in the office, so they're probably okay. But now someone, you've never met them in person, you've onboarded them all remote, or maybe they're just at home, they download information to their desktops, and you don't really know what they have. And if they leave the organization, they're supposed to, give the laptop back, or maybe they keep it. You don't know what's out there. And so we've seen a lot of organizations trying to figure out and solve that problem in terms of what's being downloaded onto my laptops, what's already on there today, and how are they interacting with it, and where's it going? So you'll commonly see this for, I guess, discovering, and then the access controls locally for how folks are downloading information, getting it from a file share, emailing it to each other, just things of that sort, and also sharing it, I guess, amongst their messaging apps or their social media apps or something like that. So that's probably the biggest number one thing that I've seen that. So yeah.
Thanks, Jeff.